We're back for episode 4 of the Fishbowl Hockey Podcast. And back by popular demand is my buddy Matthew Fiacco. Matty was my guest for the debut episode talking all things Oilers, which was a big hit. Thanks to Matty, he made it go viral, spreading the word everywhere he went and racking up over 400 views to set the bar for this show. Matty, what are the views at now?
461 to be exact.
Holy wow, that'll be tough to top. But thanks again for joining me, Maddie. I was worried you
Thanks for
might.
having me on the show again.
Yeah, I was worried you might already be too famous for the Fishbowl podcast. Everyone's saying you're the next Gene Principe, but I'm glad you're here to preview Hockey Day in Canada and share your thoughts on all 7 Canadian NHL teams, their playoff chances, and potential trade deadline moves. So happy to have the pun master back in the saddle. See you looking good there in Rogers Arena, and you're down in the crowd. I'm up here in the press box, but it'll be a lot of fun again. Are you ready for round 2?
Yeah, get this party started.
Absolutely. And this will be a totally unbiased show, as you can tell by our jerseys. But we promise to give every team their share of the spotlight today, starting in the East and working our way west. So our haters, those Leafs and Canucks fans who are complaining about too much Oilers content, should hopefully get their fill on today's show as well. We'll even have some Flames content for your brother-in-law, Matty, so you can burn him again.
Yeah,
Ready to tackle the Flames today?
yep.
Good stuff. In all seriousness, though, this is an exciting time for every Canadian fan base with all 7 teams in the playoff mix midway through the NHL season and heading into Hockey Day in Canada, which is highlighted by 3 all-Canadian matchups on Saturday. That Hockey Day in Canada schedule starts with Ottawa hosting Boston. That's at noon our time here in BC, followed by Toronto hosting Montreal and Winnipeg hosting Calgary in the early games or the early evening games, and Edmonton visiting Vancouver for the nightcap, the late games. So, Maddie, at the time of our recording, which is prior to Thursday's games, Winnipeg Calgary right now would be a playoff preview. If the playoffs started prior to tonight's games, it would be Winnipeg Calgary in the first round. But all 7 Canadian teams are either in a playoff spot or within 2 points, within 1 win of being in a playoff spot. So there's potential for a Battle of Ontario, maybe even a Battle of Alberta. So lots to look forward to in the second half of the season.
Yeah, it should be down the stretch we go.
Right? Good old call from Jack Michaels, and then it takes you back to the horse racing days. But Hockey Day in Canada, speaking of going back, Maddie, Hockey Day in Canada is an annual celebration. This year it's taking place in Canmore, Alberta. I know they got lots of festivities planned there, but I understand you have some family ties to Canmore or some good memories from your younger years and back in Canmore.
Yeah, my auntie and uncle lived there for a couple of years. We went to go check their house. I went on the balcony, and there is no railing on the balcony upstairs. And he's like, Matthew, careful, your first step's a long one.
So
And then we went hiking up to the Three Sisters, all the way at the top, and I climbed out to the middle peak, and I saw the view of the whole city. It was pretty cool.
yeah, that is cool. And you're not the only family member with the one-liners or the jokes. Hey, that was a good one. Your first step's a long one. But I guess if we're jumping right into it, Maddie, like I said, taking a look at all the Canadian teams from east to west. So starting with the Montreal Canadiens, and I don't know if I told you this, but we're going to do this segment in French. So I hope your French is you were practicing your French last night for this episode. How's your French today?
Not
Not good. Not our good friend Dom might be watching. You might have to bust out some French for her. But just kidding, buddy. The Montreal Canadiens. Marty St. Louis has the Habs cooking since Christmas time. Getting Patrick Laine back in December gave them a big bump. They got the rookie sensation Lane Hudson racking up points on defense, making his case for the Calder Trophy as NHL Rookie of the Year. Cole Caulfield. He's not the biggest guy, but he just keeps lighting the lamp. He seems like he's scoring every night. Kirby Dach's heating up in the new year. They even have that new goaltender, Jakob Dobis or Dobis. He's shining in net, so a quality tandem there with Sam Montembeault. But what do you make of the Canadians' recent success to start the new year?
Yeah, they're playing pretty well right now. Um, I just don't see it sustaining. Here's my reason why. I It's hard to put pressure on two young goalies when goalies take longer to develop. They usually play well at like late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, that's a good point. So they might be having a hot stretch right now, but you don't think the goaltending might not be sustainable as far as I mean, the trade deadline's March 7th. We're still almost 2 months away from that. We got the big Four Nations tournament takes half of February off, so there's not a ton of games left between now and the trade deadline. But if it was up to you, Montreal would still be sellers, you think, or you think there's enough momentum that maybe this could turn into a playoff team?
I think they'll be sellers.
Yeah, and they definitely have some pieces to potentially move. They got four sort of pending unrestricted free agents. A guy that'll be coveted, David Savard, a right shot defenseman who's won a cup before. A guy who's having a really good year, and they're even in contract talks potentially extending him. But Jake Evans, they'd like to keep him, but obviously that type of third, fourth line center would maybe even return a first round pick at the deadline. Another guy who's two guys that are bouncing back this year and part of the success in Montreal, Christian Dvorak and Joel Armia. I would expect some of those four guys to be on the move. Would you agree?
Yeah, the trade assets to get pieces back for the future.
And you think some of those guys, some like Savard and some of them, would there be a lot of teams interested?
Yeah,
Right on. And what about, I know they have some other guys that have some term left, guys like Brendan Gallagher and Josh Anderson. I know you mentioned as well when we were talking the other day, you think there'd be big interest in their top defenseman, Mike Matheson, if they were willing to move him.
yeah, yeah. The others might be interested, maybe the Leafs too.
Yeah, we might see, you're right. You might see some all Canadian trades, let alone all Canadian playoff matchups. You might see some all Canadian buyer and seller action at the trade deadline, hey?
Yeah, it'd be pretty awesome.
For sure. And you look, like I said, the Canadians, I think the future is bright for Montreal, but maybe keep the focus on the future. They're
Yeah,
yeah, their first overall draft pick a couple of years ago, Yuri Slafkovsky. He's only got 4 goals through 40 games. Again, prior to Thursday's game. But then they got young guy, Ivan Demidov in the KHL. He's got, I think, 20 games left, and he only needs 5 goals to break Kirill Kaprizov's record for the most goals by an under 20 skater in the KHL in Russia. So he's looking really promising as a guy that's going to come over and light it up as early as next season. His KHL contract's done at the end of this season. They got David Reinbacher, was a 5th overall pick, defenseman who's had some injury trouble, but he's back skating in the AHL. Logan Mailloux, Mailloux is down there in the AHL. He's putting up a lot of points in the AHL. Another big, those guys are both bigger bodies to complement Hudson in the future. Joshua Roy, Owen Beck, Michael Hage is our 3 more forwards that probably project onto that roster over the next couple seasons. And I mean, their goaltending, you said it, it's in good shape right now with Sam Montembeault and young Jakub Dobish. But there's a guy coming, Jacob Fowler, who's probably going to have that crease. And there's a lot of people in Montreal that think he could have a run like Carey Price had there. There's high expectations for Jacob Fowler, although there were for Caden Primo, and he just got waived. But what do you think of the future in Montreal? Is this a team that is going to be challenging for cups in a couple of years?
yeah, the torch will be lit, but I see it dimming out right now.
No,
The
that's
future will be bright for sure.
yeah, and I think you're playing off Guy Lafleur, right? They have the torch there when he was on the ice. That was awesome. Yeah. I guess if we're making our way out of Quebec and then just across the border into Ontario, the nation's capital, the Ottawa Senators, and this is a team, Maddie, that I think really wants to take that step and make the playoffs this season. I think it's important for them with new ownership, potential for new arena in the works, and really to finally take that step because they've been close a couple times, but it's been a lot of disappointment, and it can't always be next year. So I think this is the year with Steve Staios as the new GM and Travis Green as the new coach. It seems like Brady Tkachuk's been leading by example, and there were some trade rumors with the Rangers when they were struggling that maybe they would target Brady Tkachuk, but the management ownership did a good job silencing those rumors, and Brady Tkachuk looks like the face of the franchise there. Obviously, Matthew Tkachuk just won a cup with Florida. Is this the year that the Ottawa Senators force their way into the playoffs?
Yeah, I like their chances making it this year.
Montreal and Ottawa in the East heading into Thursday's games. They're both a point and 2 points out, so they're only a win away from one of those wild card spots. They're even within striking distance of the third seed in that tough Atlantic division with obviously Toronto's at the top there, and then the two Florida teams, Florida and Tampa Bay, and Boston still in the picture. So they're going to have to overtake probably one of those teams or two of those teams to get in the playoffs and make any noise. But they got some good momentum going as well. The Senators do. Obviously, Adam Gaudette's been a pleasant surprise. I think he's up to 14 or 15 goals. Some of their young guys, Tim Stützle, Drake Batherson, Josh Norris, they're just growing year over year. Shane Pinto's picking it up. I think Ridley Gregg's a guy that could be a playoff performer if they make it in. A couple of their veteran forwards, Claude Giroux and David Perron, haven't had as much of an impact this season, but maybe they're saving it for the second half or the playoffs. But that forward group, Maddie, do you think that's a group that if they get into the playoffs, maybe this team could pull an upset in that Battle of Ontario if it came to that, or they could make some noise in the playoffs?
I like to see them add one more piece to the forward group. Someone like a John Cape, Gabriel Pajot, maybe, who's been familiar with the Ottawa Senators organization, would be a nice fit.
Yeah, there's a couple guys you mentioned that are kind of that same type of player they could add. The other guy I know you talked about was Yanni Gourde. So one of those guys, Pajot or Gourde, I think that would be a good piece for Ottawa to pick up and really cement themselves at center anyway, down the middle, which is important come playoff time. On defense, they got Thomas Chabot and Jake Sanderson. They're both kind of dominating on D, and their goaltending, Maddie. We talked about goaltending with Montreal too, but Linus Ullmark for a stretch there, he was unbeatable before he got hurt. He was a big reason the Senators got into this playoff race, and obviously they acquired him in the offseason, traded for him out of Boston, a guy who's won the Vezina Trophy, who was part of the league's best goals against tandem last year with Jeremy Swayman. But Linus Ullmark has a bit of a slow start, but he's really came on before he got injured. But he's been a big success so far as an offseason acquisition for Ottawa. And the young guy there, Levi Merilainen, has been stepping up in Ullmark's absence. So I guess they're finally getting the goaltending that they needed over the last couple seasons when Judas Korpisalo and Cam Talbot and some of those guys weren't stopping enough shots to get to the playoffs.
Yeah. They maybe need another piece on the back end, like a Cody Ceci as well, who's also familiar with the organization too.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, another shutdown guy. I know they got Travis Hamonics there, and they did get Nicholas Jensen for Jacob Chychrun out of that Washington trade. But I think you're right. Cody Ceci having come up, I think he's an Ottawa kid and having come up with the Senators, and he's a pending free agent in San Jose. So I think there could be a chance or a good chance that Cody Ceci gets moved, and maybe it's a homecoming for him. So I like that idea, and then probably the fit there in Ottawa. As you're mentioning some of these guys, Gourde, Pajot, Ceci, I think it's safe to say that the Senators are wannabe buyers this season. They want that boost. Steve Staios wants to give the group an extra boost for their playoff push, and we talked about what they're shopping for, some of their potential targets. But the one thing with Ottawa is they don't have a ton of trade chips. That I expect them to move this year's first round pick. I think that's a sign that, hey, we are serious about making the playoffs this year. I think they will trade their first round pick for maybe one of those forwards, Pajot or Gourde. I think both those guys might command a first round pick just because they are playoff performer type guys. Ottawa has their first, second, and third round picks in this year's draft. But the thing with the Senators is they haven't drafted very well in terms of top prospects. Tyler Boucher was a top 15 pick who I don't think too many teams are burning up Staios' phone asking for him to be a key piece in a trade. They acquired Xavier Bourgault from Edmonton in a swap this offseason. They like Bourgault, but I mean, he's probably their second or third best forward prospect. And then they got the big Swede on the back end, Gabriel Ellison. I think he's a guy that maybe some teams would call about. He's kind of a Eric Chernak type guy or a big or a Radko Gudas type guy. But the one guy I don't think they're taking calls on, even though he didn't make Team Canada for the World Juniors, is Carter Yakimchuk of the Calgary Hitmen. Their first round pick this year in 2024, top 10 pick. I think he's pretty untouchable for the Senators. It would take a real stud that's going to really put them over the top to even entertain trading Carter Yakimchuk, because he'll give them a big three on D next season with Chabot and Sanderson. But overall, Maddie, would you agree that if they don't make the playoffs this year, that would be, I don't know if failure is the right word, but a big disappointment for the Ottawa Senators?
Yes, I do agree that it'd be a big disappointment for the Senators if they don't make playoffs this year.
For sure. And then the center of the universe is next, Maddie, the Toronto Maple Leafs. They obviously have they're leading their division prior to Thursday's games. They're at the top of that tough Atlantic division. So that shows they've had a strong start under new coach Craig Berube. His systems seem to be working. They're one of the leaders in the Eastern Conference. But as you know, Maddie, all eyes are on the playoffs for Toronto. That's where that's the only games that matter if you're a Leafs fan. And obviously Mitch Marner, pending free agent. They have, starting January 1st, they could have announced an extension for Marner. He was eligible to sign an extension. That hasn't happened yet. It's only been a couple of weeks, but Marner's probably been their MVP under Berube, and maybe that's a better fit than we expected. I didn't know what Marner and Berube, how they would gel or get along, and if we'd be talking about the Leafs trading Marner, but now I think we're probably talking about them extending or re-signing Marner, hey?
Yeah.
That's the way you're leaning? You think he's going to be a long-term Leaf still?
Leaf. Yep. Yes, I do. He's going to be signed with the club.
Right on. And Austin Matthews, he's been battling back issues this season, but he's scoring again now. But that obviously is a lingering concern as they get closer to playoffs. Austin Matthews' health, as far as how far they can go in the playoffs. I know he missed some games in that playoff series last year as well, but the Leafs probably go as far as Matthews can take them.
Yeah, Austin Matthews is a big gun. They'll go as far as he can take them.
Yeah, for sure. And on the back end, Maddie, a couple new faces this year. Chris Tanev basically comes as advertised. He's helped their penalty kill shutdown guy. Oliver Ekman-Larsson coming off the cup win with Florida. He's been solid too. A guy that kind of was, he's bounced around the league a little bit, but seems to have found a home in Toronto. They actually signed him to an extension. Is big Philippe Myers on the back end. He's been I guess you could say a pleasant surprise lately. He's actually playing top pairing with Morgan Riley. And we all know Riley is still steady, he plays in all situations, but he's not that productive for the top power play. So is that something? I know they had John Klingberg there a couple of seasons ago. He struggled with injuries and has been away from the game, but is that something the Leafs revisit as far as acquiring or finding a power play specialist at the trade deadline?
Yeah, they're in the sweepstakes right now too, along with Edmonton, Ottawa.
And you're talking about John Klingberg potentially making a comeback, right? There's a lot of talk that he's going to sign for the last half of the year in playoffs.
Yeah.
And there's some familiarity there. So maybe the Leafs, he might be one of the teams that have a good chance of landing him.
Right now, I'm hearing that the Oilers are favorite to land up. But yeah, they should go after him too. Familiar face.
For sure. And what about their goaltending, Maddie? Because it's been a strong point throughout the season, but obviously Anthony Stolarz was maybe in the conversation for the Vezina before he got hurt. He had great numbers. He was almost a league leader in most goaltending stats, and then he went down. And Joseph Woll, who's had injury issues, concerns for several seasons. If he could ever stay healthy, he could be a a number one goalie in the league. But what do you think of that? It should be a strength if they're both healthy, but who is the starter in Toronto come playoff time? And are you confident that both those goalies, at least one of them, can be healthy when the games really matter?
I think Joseph Wall gets a start, but if someone gets hurt, it's a big question mark. I
Yeah,
mean, they could go after a security blanket.
yeah, I mean they have Matt Murray down on the minors, but I mean he hasn't played a ton in the NHL, and Dennis Hildeby. But yeah, I do wonder if they consider. I mean, I don't think they're bringing James Reimer back to Toronto, or but maybe somebody like that, right? There are a lot of guys out there. I don't think Jack Campbell's coming back to Toronto either. I think those ships have sailed, but some
So,
type of veteran guy that maybe could be a security blanket, even if they had to carry three goaltenders. On the NHL roster in the second half, or in case somebody's hurt or somebody's out with an injury, they can roster an extra goalie that has that experience. But then again, Matt Murray did win two cups and has played on some big stages, so maybe they're confident with him as a third stringer. I know John Tavares suffered a little injury this week. I'm not sure what the update is there, how long he's out. But Tavares, even without, they kind of made the big captaincy change. Tavares hands off the C to Austin Matthews this year, but Tavares has stayed productive. William Nylander is still producing. You got the
mm,
young guys, Matthew Nyes and Nick Robertson. They're still developing and becoming more of regular contributors. And then the two Maxes, Max Domi and Max Pacioretty. I think those guys are playoff performers. I think they'll step up when the games get when the real bullets start flying in April and May. So do you like that forward group for the Leafs, or what do you think they need, or what do you think their plans are for the trade deadline as far as forwards go?
um, yeah, they could get like another grinder type forward, maybe like a Brock Nielsen in Toronto.
Yeah, that would be a big pickup. I know Ryan O'Reilly's name's out there. He was back in
Yeah,
Toronto a few seasons ago. I don't think he's probably not necessarily a fit, but another guy that you mentioned that was interesting. I think he's got term left, but depending what happens to the Philadelphia Flyers. But Scott Lawton was a guy that you
and
said a good
yeah,
Ontario boy that could be a third, fourth line center there in Toronto. Because I know when you look at that depth chart, I do think they got to upgrade the bottom six with at least one more center. Because guys like David Kampf, Kelly Yarncroc, Pontus Holmberg. I don't think those guys are the answer in the playoffs. So I think you get a real solid 3-4 center. Some of the names we mentioned, Lawton. I mean, obviously Brock Nelson would play higher up in the lineup. Probably somebody would have to move to the wing, or maybe they would go Matthews, Tavares, Nelson down the middle. But I think maybe if there's serious concern about Austin Matthews' injury, then maybe they swing for a big name like Brock Nelson. But otherwise, I'm thinking maybe somebody more along the lines of a Scott Lawton. But are either of those guys, let's just say Nelson or Lawton, are they big enough names that the Leafs would consider moving a guy like Easton Cowan, who maybe didn't have the best World Juniors, but he's an Ontario kid, a first round pick, and dominating the OHL with the London Knights? Because the Leafs don't have a first round pick this year, Maddie. They've already traded their first round pick. So Easton Cowan's probably the big piece if they're looking for to land a big fish.
yeah, big prospect. I see the Leafs maybe taking a swing at Jonathan Taves,
Oh, that's an
maybe,
interesting name. Yeah.
or like trading for Steven Stamkos as well in Nashville. See if he comes. See if Nashville lets him go.
Yeah, they like bringing home their Ontario guys, Joe Thornton, John Tavares, Steven Stamkos would love to probably be a Leaf. Obviously, he signed a big deal in Nashville, so they'd have to figure out how that works with the salary cap. Even though the cap's supposed to go up $9 million next season, maybe that's something for the offseason. But obviously, Stamkos would be a huge piece if Nashville turns into a seller and Barry Trotz starts shopping those big names. Although Stamkos, I think, had a 3 or 4 point night here this week. So when they beat Vegas, Stamkos had 3 or 4 points. He's starting to pick it up there. But yeah, I mean, obviously Stamkos, I think Easton Cowan would have to be involved. But I wonder at what point does Brad Treliving entertain trading Easton Cowan as sort of their big trade chip? Is it for a Brock Nelson type guy, or does it have would even a guy like Scott Lawton potentially get Easton Cowan into the conversation? But as we said, I think the defense it's it's had some change, but I think guys like Jake McCabe and Yanni Hakanpää, they've been banged up, but they're kind of those physical shutdown type guys for the playoffs. Obviously, Tanev helps a lot if they could bring in a guy like Klingberg or somebody to help that power play. But in general, I think Maddie, we agree that the Leafs are all in again this year, especially if they're walking Marner to free agency, right? I mean, he's a pending free agent. If there's not an extension coming and they're not trading him at the deadline, then they have to go all in and try and capitalize on this one last playoff run with Marner. And in that case, I think it's almost Eastern Conference Final or bust in terms of a successful season or even to show progress under Craig Berube, because we all know the real test for the Leafs comes in the playoffs.
Yeah, they they go in the first or second round almost every year.
Yes, that's where that East Final, right? If they could get through 2 rounds, that would be. I don't know when the last time they did that. Probably in the 90s, or maybe they did one time back in the early 2000s. But I don't think any of the current players on the roster have been to the third round. Not with this Leafs team anyway.
No, they haven't. Yeah, let's see if they can turn into a contender or a make believe.
Right? The make believes. I love it. And next up, Maddie, you got the Winnipeg Jets, who they are making us a believer this year, rolling along as central leaders, maybe exceeding expectations. They had the playoff collapse against Colorado last year, but Connor Hellebuck, he shook that right off. He's rebounded. He's got to be the Vezina frontrunner right now for the NHL's top goalie. I think he's leading all statistical categories, including wins. Their top line, Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, Gabriel Velarde, that's become one of the league's best lines. They just keep getting more and more chemistry from looks like 1 week to the next. It's a deep forward group, Maddie, but the second line center as of today, Vladislav Nemesnikov. Granted, he seems to be working well with Nikolai Ehlers and Cole Perfetti, but if you're a cup contending team, you probably need a better 2C than Vladislav Nemesnikov. So is that something you agree on? And who are some of the targets if they're looking at centers?
Yeah, someone like maybe like a Yanni too, or like Jonathan Taves, who's a Winnipeg kid.
Wouldn't that be a story, hey? If
Yeah,
Taves actually could make a successful comeback, no one's really seen him skate yet, but it came out of a GQ article. It was in GQ of all places. It wasn't an NHL insider, but I don't know if he was fully serious, a captain serious, right? I don't know if he was fully serious, but he did mention in a GQ article that he got some took care of his health and he's feeling a lot better and he'd like to make an NHL comeback potentially this season. So in that case, I think definitely the Winnipeg Jets, if they're looking at the bottom end, I don't know if he's a second line center at this stage of his career, but the bottom end of the lineup, I definitely think Taves would be a good fit in Winnipeg. Some of those bigger names that are out there on the free or on the trade market, like a guy like Brock Nelson, somebody like that, as you mentioned before, could potentially be a fit in Winnipeg. Then you got Scheifele, Brock Nelson, and Adam Lowry down the middle, and now you're probably talking about a serious cup contender. But with Winnipeg, Maddie, we kind of talked about this. Maybe they don't want to rock the boat too much because they're still reaping the benefits from that Pierre-Luc Dubois trade to LA. That was a real shrewd move by Kevin Cheveldayoff. It got them 3 of their current forwards. Obviously, Gabe Velarde has been a stud. He's been the best player in that trade by far. Pierre-Luc Dubois is having a resurgence this season, but it's with Washington. LA gave up on him already, so LA has nothing to show for Pierre-Luc Dubois, really. Although actually they do, because I believe they got Darcy Kemper back and he's their starting goaltender for Dubois. So LA did okay there too. But Gabe Velarde, Alex Iafallo, and Rasmus Kupari for the Jets are all contributing. Something I wonder about Winnipeg as well, Maddie, on the back end is their defense. Is it overachieving, or is Connor Hellebuck just so good that they don't need a great defense? Because, I mean, Josh Morrissey, we know he's a stud. Neil Pionk, he's another pending free agent, but he's sort of their number 2. But I think with Hellebuck as the last line of D, I just wonder, do they still need another veteran top 4D and maybe those David Savard types, or who do you have on your list there for potential top 4D that could be a potential fit for Winnipeg?
speaking of Winnipeg, they just made a trade last night. They sent Dmitry Kuzmin to the Blackhawks for Isaac Phillips.
Right, yeah. There's a defenseman who's got some NHL games
Uh,
this year. Is Phillips probably they've got a lot of guys that are in that sort of 5 to 10 range on their depth chart, and Phillips probably slides in there. I don't expect him to fill that top four role, but I definitely think that's something that another top four defenseman and a second line center for Winnipeg, and then the other big thing is the goaltending. I mean, Connor Hellebuck is the man there. There's no doubt about it. But Eric Comrie and Capo Kakkonen are sort of the 2, 3. I don't know if that's enough insurance for Hellebuck if something was to happen. But do you expect Winnipeg to make more subtle moves, or do you think they could surprise and or not necessarily surprise, but do you think a subtle move or a big buyer as far as the Winnipeg Jets go to hopefully have more playoff success?
I mean, I wouldn't ruin the chemistry too much. They've been unreal, but there is a point of riding Connor Hellenbuck or Horace for too long. He's going to burn out come playoff time. It's a long year.
Yeah, that's a good point because he plays so many games that you don't want to get to that first round of the playoffs and have Hellebuck be tired or fatigued. I mean, I think he's a guy that wants the net every night. He's a competitive goaltender, but I think you're right. I think that's a bit of a risk that maybe, and I'm sure they're once they get clinch the playoffs, like down the last few weeks of the season, they'll probably platoon or rotate Comrie in there and make sure he's ready just in case, or unless they do grab another more veteran, established goaltender as a backup at the deadline. And Winnipeg definitely has some trade chips. I mean, Brad Lambert is probably the guy who's going to be that second line center, whether it's next season or the season after. He had a little audition this year, maybe didn't do great in the NHL, but they also have guys like Braden Yeager, who they got from Pittsburgh, who was captain to Canada at the World Juniors. I think they're probably not going to flip Yeager twice in 1 year, but he's a guy teams would ask
Oh,
about. Colby Barlow was another forward who was a first round pick, and there's actually a Russian kid that not kid, I think he's like 23 or 24 years old already, but Dmitry Rashevsky, I think he potentially could be coming over to the NHL next season, and they do have their first round pick this year too. So Winnipeg's got some ammo if the Jets want to make some moves, but I think you're right. The chemistry, things are going really well there under Scott Arniel's kind of taken over he was an associate coach, now he's the head coach, but seems like the Jets are rolling or soaring. They probably don't need to rock the boat too much there. What about the Calgary Flames, Maddie? This is a team I'm sure you just can't wait to talk about.
yeah. Um, I see them as like a bubble team slash getting in the playoffs. Same thing as Ottawa. They're getting a new rink, so they want that playoff gate money revenue to help pay for the new rink as well.
Yeah, and Calgary's already broke ground on their new rink. I mean, it's got funding in place, but definitely some playoff revenue would help. And I think you got Craig Conroy as the GM, right? He was part of the Red Mile back in the Red Mile run back in 2004 when they came so close against Tampa Bay. So he obviously, I think those competitive fire gets going in him, and Drew McGinley's part of that management group, Marty Jelena. So I think that old guard would love to see him get back in the playoffs, but maybe realistically, there wasn't much expected from this Flames team this season. So I think hats off to some guys we know, Ryan Huska and Dan Lambert, reunited from their Kelowna Rockets days, but their entire coaching staff for getting the results they're getting out of out of the Calgary Flames roster. One thing, I don't think they had any pressure to start the year, so that always helps when you're not expected to be a playoff team, and maybe you're taking some teams by surprise, or you're just playing a little looser. But definitely, I think most people would say the Flames are overachieving. The fact that they're currently in a wild card spot, Maddie, heading into Thursday's games tonight. I know we don't necessarily like the Flames, but I know their fans are fired up. They're excited for playoff potential. Do you think this is a team that can hang on to that wild card spot?
Yeah, if their goaltending keeps playing the way it is, it's a big question mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dustin Wolf, right? Standing tall as the little guy in net.
Right.
I think they list him at 6 foot, but I don't think he's 6 feet tall. But he's forced his way into the Calder conversation as well, and even more so if the Flames do make the playoffs. I think Dustin Wolf. I mean, if he's not getting Vezina votes, he's definitely getting some Calder votes. But like I said, they're battling for a wild card right now, so interesting to see where they go from here whether they'll be buyers or sellers ahead of that March 7th trade deadline. Because as we mentioned, even though Conroy and deep down everybody wants to win, but this is still a team in transition. But they do have a good mix of veterans and youth. I think Jonathan Huberdeau, his resurgence this season is a big reason for Calgary's success. He's the player they thought they were getting for Matthew Tkachuk, and obviously his first year in Calgary was a bit of a bust, and they had signed him to that big deal. But now I'd say he's earning the contract or close to it as far as his salary this season. But you're right with the new arena and wanting that playoff revenue. But you talked about goaltending, and we highlighted Dustin Wolf, but the other guy there, Dan Vladar, he's a pending free agent. I know they have Devin Cooley playing well for the Wranglers in the AHL, but maybe a veteran, maybe even an American goaltender to pair with Dustin Wolf. Or what do you think? They make a tweak in goal between now and the deadline to give Dustin Wolf a different partner going forward?
Yeah, maybe like a Peter Mrazek, just like a little treat, like whereas Merzlikins, I could see him fitting well in Nashville.
Or with Calgary, yeah.
Calgary, yeah.
Yeah, Peter Mrazek in Chicago, I think, is available. And I mean, Columbus is another team that's surprising the East. They're right in that playoff race. But if they tap out, I think Elvis Merzlikins has name's been in trade rumors for a number of years, and definitely either one of those, I think Mrazek or Merzlikins could end up in Calgary. I think those are two good options you brought up. On defense, Mackenzie Weegar, much like, I mean, he was already having a good year last year, but much like Jonathan Huberdeau, when you take a step back now, I mean, Matthew Tkachuk's got a nice shiny Stanley Cup ring already in Florida, but maybe that trade last year, everyone's like, wow. At first, when it first happened, everyone thought Calgary ripped off Florida. And then halfway through last season, everyone's going, wow, what a mistake the Flames made. Look at, Tkachuk's got Florida as one of the top teams in the league already, and he's the go-to guy there, and Huberdeau's struggling, and Weegar was doing okay last year, but not good enough to justify that trade. But now when you look at it, to get Huberdeau and Weegar and a couple other pieces for Matthew Tkachuk, maybe that was a fair trade at the end of the day, Maddie, now that we've had this long to evaluate it.
Yeah, definitely a fair trade.
And
they also got like Connor Zary too. He's been playing well since, I mean, like not since he got hurt, but like before he got hurt.
Yeah, I think he's a big part of the future in Calgary. Connor Zary, Matt Coronado, Jacob Pelche, a couple other young forwards that are having good seasons in Calgary. And they have prospects trending well, too, with guys like Samuel Honzek and Zane Parekh, and even that Rory Kieran's came up this week. He got a couple assists. William Stromgren, I think, is another big body Swede that'll eventually make his NHL debut. Talking about Weegar on defense, though, Maddie, the guy who you mentioned, Mike Matheson, could get a lot for Montreal on the trade market. Rasmus Andersson is a guy that could fetch a big return for Calgary if they were, you want to call it retooling, rebuilding, looking a year or two down the road still. Rasmus Andersson would get you a first round pick, another really good prospect, maybe two more really good prospects. But Craig Conroy has come out this week and said no interest in trading Rasmus Andersson. What do you make of that, Maddie? Is that a good stance by the GM, or should they be trying to cash in on Rasmus Andersson?
I mean, if you have trade value and assets, you should be willing to move and constant rebuild for the future.
Yeah, I that's the way I kind of lean too. I mean, I get that Rasmus Andersson. I think he's a assistant captain in Calgary, one of the longer serving team members, along with fellow Swede Mikael Backlund. So they really like him as a leader there. Obviously, Weegar, Huberdeau, Kadri. Like I said, they got a good mix of Blake Coleman. They got some veteran guys on that team that, if they get into the playoffs, Maddie, and again, we're kind of expecting them to maybe tail off a bit in the second half, even though they've been scrappy to this point to stay in that wild card spot. But it probably doesn't make sense for them. They have 2 first-round picks this year, Maddie. Neither of them are their own pick. They got Florida's pick and New Jersey's pick. Probably doesn't make sense to move those picks. Maybe they won't be sellers. Maybe they mostly try to stay the course and sneak in. But if they get in it, is that a team you'd be scared to play? Because I mean, if Edmonton was to overtake, they're only 2 points behind Vegas heading into tonight's games. If Edmonton was to overtake Vegas and finish ahead of Winnipeg, if Edmonton was to win the Western Conference and Calgary stayed in that second wild card spot, you could have a battle of Alberta in the first round again. And I think that would be fun. But is Calgary a team that, when you look at that roster, you wouldn't want to play them, or is that a pretty easy out for the Oilers? Or as of today, it'd be the Jets in the first round. So if the playoffs started tomorrow, it would be Calgary, Winnipeg. Is that an easy out, or do you think the Flames could make some noise?
I mean, look what McDavid and Draisaitl's Magic has done against the Flames in the playoffs. They've been lighting them up.
Absolutely, and I think you're leading us right into you kind of bring on that Battle of Alberta. And next up is the Edmonton Oilers, the team that obviously we follow closest, the team I'm sure you can't wait to weigh in on. But I think this year, after going all the way to the final and all the way to forcing a Game 7 last year, doesn't seem like that long ago, but they were in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final, and I think that means this year, from the start of training camp, it really was cup or bust, and Edmonton's going all in again. And this is Stan Bowman's turn to be a buyer. Obviously, he replaced Ken Holland as the new GM. What are you expecting out of the Oilers? Because I know they don't have a first round pick this year, Maddie, and the cupboard is quite bare for top prospects. But I feel like they're going to be buying any way they can. Do you expect them to still make a few moves?
Yeah, I do expect them to make a few moves.
Where do you see them going? Because right now they're playing really well. The way they're playing and clicking lately, I think the Oilers on paper, they might not need many upgrades. I know we've talked about goaltending, but Calvin Pickard just stood on his head in Minnesota. I'm sure you saw that save he made on the 2-on-0. That was awesome. And he made 3 or 4 big saves in that game, even though it was a 5-3 game and he let in 3 goals. He was probably one of McDavid, probably the first star with 2 goals and an assist, but Pickard right there with him. And Stuart Skinner, I know you're going to talk about him and the run he's on, but we talked a lot about goaltending in our last show when we focused solely on the Oilers. We talked about, some defense, but you brought up Ty Emberson, and I mean, he's been one of the bright spots on the back end, along with Brett Kulak. Even Darnell Nurse is having a really strong season, a bounce back season. So what do these Oilers actually need? What are they looking for?
A right shot D-man.
And
maybe a depth D-man too.
You think that's still the big priority? That's sort of that top 4 right shot guy. Who do you like there? Who are some of the names you kind of been tracking or watching?
John Klingberg as well. Rasmus Ristolainen. 6-foot tower Connor Murphy. And yeah, maybe we'll see how Noah Phillip does at third line center, but if they might be in a third line center get as well.
Yeah, they could look for another. I mean, they got a lot of forward depth right now, especially if Evander Kane ends up being healthy for the playoffs. But definitely, I think you're right. You can never have enough veteran help. I know you even mentioned Jonathan Toews as a guy. The Oilers are already the oldest team in the league, but what's one more graybeard? If you're going for it this year, you may as well load up with guys. And I mean, nobody's got as much of a pedigree for winning and leadership and Stanley Cups as Jonathan Toews, who obviously Stan Bowman won cups with in Chicago or knew very well from Chicago. In general, Maddie, Connor McDavid, this is a contract year for him. He can't sign until or won't sign until the offseason, obviously. Like July 1st, he can sign an extension because next year is his contract year. This is he's still under contract for next season, but this is the year where at the end of this season on July 1st, he can sign his extension. And it's got to be a good sign that he's staying. If his wife, Lauren McDavid, is launching businesses in Edmonton, I know she's got a restaurant opening this spring. That must have been music to your ears that they're starting businesses in Edmonton, and looks like the captain's going to be following Leon Draisaitl as far as getting locked up long term.
Yeah. I think it's going to take like 15, 16, maybe $17 million to keep him around.
But worth every penny, right? You
Penny
I mean,
of it.
I think other teams, if he made free agency, if the cap actually does go up, Matty, $9 million to 98 million, I think some of those teams would just with his marketing ability, I think teams would throw 20 million at him without batting an eye, give him a quarter of the cap basically. 20% of the cap or 25% of the cap, whatever the max is. I think teams would offer him the max. So even at 17, I think that might be a bit of a hometown discount for Edmonton. And obviously didn't envision the cap going up maybe that much. So that's why maybe Draisaitl comes in a little bit of a discount again. But obviously Leon leading the league in goals again, Matty. That's the dynamic duo that is second to none. Zach Hyman and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, they've been heating up obviously since the Four Nations roster. So have Evan Bouchard and Stuart Skinner. Four guys that
Adam
were
Henry too.
Henry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those four in particular, Hyman, Nuge, Bouchard, Skinner, they were sort of talked about potentially being on that Four Nations team. Obviously, McDavid, the only Oiler that ended up on that roster. Do you think that those snubs fueled those other four, or maybe it was Maddie's appearance, your appearance on the podcast, on the Fishbowl podcast? Maybe you sparked those boys.
Yeah. I think they would be, and I don't think they were being mad about not being selected. I think they were a bit disappointed for sure.
For sure. And I mean, there could still be injuries. That's why you want to be playing well going into February because you don't wish injuries on anybody, but a couple of those forwards get hurt in the next couple of weeks. And Zach Hyman might want to keep his ringer on. He might not want his phone on silent. He might be getting a call still, or Bouchard on the back end, or even the way Skinner's been playing. And maybe talk a little bit about that because I know last time you were on the show, Matty, you dropped some Skinner stats on us, but he hasn't tailed off at all since the last time we talked. He's
even got hotter.
Yeah, how is he doing lately? You must know some of his numbers.
Yeah, last 8 games he's been 6 wins, 1 loss, and 1 overtime loss. He's got a 1.89 goals against average and a 930 save percentage.
And that's when you factor in that one loss was, what was it, a 5 or 6 goal loss in Pittsburgh. So you take out that one bad game in there, and he's at 950 or above for save percentage. So
yeah.
Stuart Skinner, I've questioned him at times and rolled my eyes on some of the goals he's let in the playoffs, but you can't deny he's been stellar stew lately. So other guys.
Becker picked apart Minnesota last night. Pardon the pun.
Right, there you go. The puns are flowing. Connor Brown, Vasily Podkolzin. Podkolzin got credited with a goal again in Minnesota, but Connor Brown has worked his way from barely being in the lineup. He's now playing on the top line with Connor McDavid. They've been bright spots up front this season to have both Brown and Podkolzin still in the top 6 at this stage of the season. Like I said, the forward depth probably among the league's best. I know you've mentioned guys like Corey Perry and Kasperi Kapanen and Janmark. I mean, the forwards in general are all. That's why they're having so much success right now. The entire team is firing in all cylinders. But there's still a lot of talk of Evander Kane. He only had knee surgery last week, Matty. I think he's going to be 4 or 5 weeks recovery, and then once that knee's ready to go, he'll be on the ice because I think his sports hernia surgery and his other surgeries I think are basically healed, or the timing will be right that he'll be all healed up around that trade deadline and they'll get him ramped up and he could be this year's Nikita Kucherov, Mark Stone. I know Colorado's doing it with Gabriel Landeskog, but these guys that are on LTIR and then boom, there they are as a potential playoff ringer. So time will tell whether Evander Kane can return this year or return to form and be an impact player to put them over the top in the playoffs. But if Kane's not back, is that something that you still want to see another impact forward, or do you think this group is good enough to win a cup as of today?
Maybe one more impact forward.
And who do you like up front? I know last show you mentioned Taylor Hall, and he's obviously been in trade rumors this week. He's on the trade bait board. He's on the trade targets list, whatever you want to call it, depending on what media you're following. But is Taylor Hall still a guy you think that would be fun to watch back in Edmonton? Obviously, him and Nuge would love to win a cup together.
Yeah, Jonathan Toews too. I mean, look at Corey Perry. He's basically defined father time
Literally, right? And he has to go out there and use his old man strength and flex and be one of the guys that's standing up for McDavid and the young teammates. Corey Perry's been leading by example. Even I mean, he still chips in offensively, but definitely he's found ways to stay in the league and still be impactful. Speaking of impactful, from one Matty to another Matty, Matthew Savoy down in the AHL. We talked about him on the last show too, and whether, who are they going to trade if they want to go get a Taylor Hall or a big name or some of those big defensemen you mentioned. Taylor Hall, Connor Murphy, both in Chicago. Maybe it's a package type deal. Everybody will be asking for Matthew Savoy, but maybe he's somebody the Oilers want to hang on to. He's been a point per game producer for Bakersfield since our last show together, and I know he's going to be in
And
the
a +7.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think, and in the AHL All-Star game as well. So where do you stand on that now? Would you even entertain trading him, or is he part of the future, or is this where you sell the farm, whether it's Savoy or Bo Akey or
Or,
anybody to to to,
or
to win that cup?
O'Reilly, or yeah, or like maybe Petrov, he's been cooking right now. His value might be soaring as well. Somebody interested in him, or
Yeah,
right, or yeah.
Sam O'Reilly's a good point too. He was their first round pick in 2024 this past year, and obviously in order to do that, they gave up their first round pick in 2025. So the Oilers don't have a first round pick. So maybe that's Sam O'Reilly was they traded up to get him, and then they end up flipping him kind of like they did with Reed Schaefer to get Matthias Ekholm. But definitely this is a big year for the Oilers. Seems like they're cup or bust, obviously, with how much success they had last year. And I know Connor McDavid just turned 28 years old this week as well. He was the birthday boy this week. So a few good seasons left. You want to see him hoist the cup sooner than later, right, Matt?
Yeah, that goal that he scored against Mini was absolutely amazing. Walks around the defender and flips the puck right in the back bar and out.
He's good at that. Hey, that short side shot coming off out of the corner or off the rush. Even I think the goalies, Philip Gustafson last night, but the goalies are always expecting him to pass, and he's always looking to pass. Like his eyes are on the other guy that would be the pass recipient, looking for that stick blade as if to see if they're going to get open, and then quick flick of the wrist, and the goalie doesn't see it coming. It's up and over the shoulder and under the bar. So yeah, he's been amazing lately, and him
And
and
yeah,
Leon leading the way still.
yeah, he might like for the playoffs too. That way teams are know he's gonna pass too, so he can fake it like he does and then rip it. Fake.
Yeah, yeah, he's so talented. He can burn you in a lot of different ways, and we could talk Oilers all day, Maddie, and we will again another day. But last and maybe least, the Vancouver Canucks are having the least amount of success of any Canadian team lately, and the most turmoil off the ice. But there's still lots of time for Vancouver to turn it around. But what do you think? What do you make of the Canucks as of today, Maddie? And what do you think's going on there in Vancouver?
I'm the Dasher Demko injury has really hurt them. He hasn't been on the ice where he's valuable in a lot in the last 2 years. And the feud between JT Miller and Pedersen has also hurt this hockey club a lot.
How do you see that playing out? Miller or Pedersen? Does someone have to go? If so, who goes, or do both of them end up going?
Yeah, I think one or both has to go for sure.
Who
I
who
mean, like, I think, I mean, JT Miller has been playing really well as a Canuck. I think they moved Pedersen instead of Miller.
Yeah, it's a difficult decision, right? Because Miller's a little bit older. Pedersen makes more money. I think you're right. I think if they were all in this year, I think you have a better chance of winning a cup with Miller just because he is that hard driving leader, playoff type guy. But I think Pedersen probably still has more skill, more upside, and similar age to Quinn Hughes. If you're building for the future, they have obviously young Jonathan Lekkerimäki, another Swede coming along that could play with Pedersen in the seasons to come. But when you look at those two, Miller and Pedersen, and potential landing spots, obviously the New York Rangers for JT Miller. There's been a lot of talk about Alexis Lafreniere, his former agent. She's now an assistant GM with Vancouver, so I think there's familiarity there. Obviously, they have Keandre Miller, Miller for Miller type trade with the Rangers, and Braden Schneider, another right shot shutdown first round pick there as well. So if they could get Alexis Lafreniere and either Keandre Miller or Braden Schneider for JT Miller, I think the Canucks would have made that trade a month ago when JT was coming back off his personal leave and all the reports started coming out about the feud between Pettersson and Miller. And on the other side, I think Pettersson, the Buffalo Sabres, being last place in the league or bottom of the Eastern Conference, makes a lot of sense if they're looking for a shakeup to target a guy like Elias Pettersson. There was talk of Dylan Cousins and Bowen Byram. Byram played his junior in Vancouver with the Giants. He's very familiar with the city. He's already a big name they'd be bringing in to play behind Quinn Hughes. So maybe that. But then other people were saying, you know what, we're not interested in Dylan Cousins. We want Tage Thompson and Bowen Byram. So I don't know if the Sabres would go that extreme, but certainly having Rasmus Dahlin and Elias Pettersson as two Swedish guys leading the Sabres would be good for their future, depending on the price. But what do you think of where Miller and Pettersson could end up?
There's talk of Pettersson maybe going to Chicago to help Bernard.
Yeah, that would be an interesting fit there. I know when he before he signed his big deal in Vancouver, his long-term deal, there definitely was talk that Chicago, if they weren't going to sign him, Chicago would be interested in trading for him. I don't know what Vancouver would get back or what they would ask for out of Chicago. Chicago does have a ton of prospects. You'd probably start with that Artem Levshunov, the guy they just took second overall defenseman. This in 2024, probably they would want him as part of the package for Pettersson. Maybe a Frank Nazar who's made his way up to the NHL. But they do have lots of pieces in Chicago. But I think Chicago needs to find somebody to play with Connor Bedard. In a perfect world, Vancouver would do Pettersson for Bedard and bring the hometown boy back to Vancouver. Connor Bedard being from the lower mainland. But I don't think Chicago would sell on Bedard anytime soon, not even for a guy like Elias Pettersson. But it would be interesting to see what that trade would look like. You made a good point, though, Maddie, about the Canucks struggling, but maybe a lot of it's they've been battling injuries to key players. Thatcher Demko, you brought up. Pettersson's missed time. Quinn Hughes has missed time. Brock Besser was injured for a stretch. I believe that was a concussion. Filip Hronek just came back this week, but they've all been sidelined for stretches. We talked about JT Miller took a personal leave that turned into a 3 or 4 week absence. So this team, the fact they're only 1 point out of a wild card spot, 1 point behind Calgary heading into Thursday's games, they're still performing at a rate that if all those guys are healthy for the last 35 games, the second half, you'd have to think the Canucks would be a team. If Miller and Pettersson can get along and put that behind them, that's probably not a team you necessarily want to play in the first round either. If Demko is healthy and everybody else.
Yeah, it's hard to find chemistry when all your top guys are missing time. Um, yeah, if they can stay healthy, I see them sneaking in. Maybe not like go all in and trade some of your top prospects in your draft picks, but maybe do like addition by subtraction.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that, especially if there is a problem. Maybe sooner than later. Maybe that's one of those big trades we do see between now and the Four Nations break in early February. I know JT Miller's part of the Team USA and Elias Pettersson is part of Team Sweden. So maybe something happens sooner than later on that front. But you make a good point there in general that if you had to bet with 35 games to go in the season, if it's going to be Calgary or Vancouver. I know obviously St. Louis and Utah and some of these other teams could still make a run too. St. Louis has been pretty hot since they changed coaches to Jim Montgomery, and Utah's. I know they lost Dylan Gunther to an injury now, but Utah has been playing well and as a relocated team, and they've got some momentum there again recently. But right now it's Calgary, Vancouver. They got a little bit of a gap on those two teams, but. Calgary 1 point up on Vancouver heading into Thursday's action. 35 games to go roughly in the season. If you had to put money on it, who gets in that last wild card spot, Calgary or Vancouver?
To me, I'd rather play Calgary. Vancouver scares me if they stay healthy.
Yeah, I think Vancouver on paper should be the better team, right? That's what
Yeah,
you feel, yeah. And then when you get into Vancouver and maybe some of the good stories from this season, obviously Jake DeBrusk coming on strong after a slow start. He had to adjust to a new team as their big free agent signing, but he's been scoring pretty regularly. Connor Garland, the little guy that's still going strong. Kiefer Sherwood's the big surprise there. He's been a perfect fit for Vancouver. I think he's averaging like 7 or 8 hits a game and yet scoring, chipping in offensively as well. So Canucks fans, there's probably a lot of Sherwood jerseys. Sherwood jersey sales are probably as good as Sherwood stick sales used to be back in the day. But Kevin Lankinen, the big savior early on for the Canucks, as the last goalie standing in the offseason. Nobody signed him. It was already into training camp, and he was back in Finland, potentially going to play over there. The Canucks gave him, I think, a league minimum, and you know they wouldn't be anywhere near the playoffs if Lankinen didn't play that well with I mean obviously they had Artur Silovs was sort of the maybe even the number one. I think he started the season opener and got at least 50% of the starts early on, but Silovs was struggling. He had some success for them in the playoffs last year when Demko got hurt, but Lankinen's really, you know, bailed them out this season more often than not. He hasn't been as strong lately, but he's probably one of their MVPs or unsung heroes between him and Sherwood. But what do you make of this team in general, Maddie? Because obviously defense still a question mark beyond Quinn Hughes and Philip Hronek. It seems like they're missing big Nikita Zadorov. I know they got Vinny Desharnais out of Edmonton and brought in some other defensemen with good size, and they already had Carson Soucy, but it feels like maybe the defense is somewhere that they could potentially improve on, or what's your read on what the Canucks do between now and the trade deadline?
well, if Demko can stay healthy, but if he can't, they're gonna need to upgrade their goaltending for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on their defense, yeah, they they have more holes in it than a Tim Horton donut does.
That's awesome. And everyone will love that one, Maddie, because obviously we know your family is big with Tim Hortons here in the Okanagan. So I'm sure your parents will get a kick out of that one too. More holes than a Tim Hortons donut. But definitely there's some uncertainty in Vancouver. Rick Tocchet, their coach, is in a contract year. The Miller Pedersen, like you said, maybe they need a New Year's resolution there sooner than later. Maybe before the Four Nations or definitely by that March 7th trade deadline. I believe Four Nations starts on your birthday. Is that February 12th, Maddie? Is that the first game?
Yeah, Canada Sweden is the first game.
Nice. That'll be a good one. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Pedersen's still a Canuck when the puck drops for Canada Sweden on Maddie's birthday on February 12th. So that's coming fast. It's less than a month away now. Obviously, we talked about, you know, could they both stay? Maybe is it better if they both go? Who we keep between the two of them? It's those are all difficult decisions for Patrick Allvin, but he's made some good trades for the Canucks, some good roster management moves. Do you think he can pull off Allvin as general manager can pull off another move to propel the Canucks back to the playoffs, or do you think they missed the cut this year, Maddie?
If they can't stay healthy, yeah, I think they might need to turn into sellers.
I guess that's the biggest thing, right? Is it all comes down to getting healthy and getting that chemistry back or that momentum back that they've had throughout most of last season when not much went wrong for Vancouver and maybe they overachieved a bit. And this year, everything that could go wrong has gone wrong, and yet they're still hanging around the playoff deadline. But it's hard to say if they're going to be buyers or sellers or if they just need a shakeup in general. Like we said, maybe some lateral swaps to get some new leaders in there if Miller and or Pedersen have to get moved out. But like I said, we're just halfway through January. We still have a ways to go to the trade deadline, and we're still a few months away from 35 games away from the playoffs. But Maddie, I got to ask you, how many Canadian teams make the playoffs this year? Who are the locks in your opinion? You got right now you got Toronto and Winnipeg leading divisions. Edmonton's just one game out of the division lead. Are those three? Do you think they're locks as of today?
Yeah,
And then what about the other four? Because you got Calgary's holding on to a wild card spot. Vancouver is 1 point out, and then in the East you got Montreal and Ottawa are 1 and 2 points out. respectively over there. So who out of those four get in, or how many teams in total? If we got, as of today, I guess we got 4 teams in and 3 teams out. But how many do you think make the playoffs?
I think Ottawa gets in and Calgary gets in.
Okay, so that would give us 5 out of 7. So
That's
yeah, only
yeah.
Montreal and Vancouver would miss out.
So
Okay, I could see that. Yeah, I think I'm still leaning that Vancouver is going to somehow find a way to get in there over Calgary. And again, I keep saying that, but every time I look, Calgary keeps hanging on to that last wild card. I just have a feeling that Vancouver, as we said, probably the better team on paper. Maybe that Four Nations break gives a big reset for the Canucks, and they can come back and be and go on a 5+ game winning streak and really pull away from Calgary in that race. I'm thinking. But I like that Ottawa pick in the East. I do think that one of Ottawa or Montreal. Right now, Ottawa's 1 point out. Montreal is the team that's 2 points out, but both are within one win and heading into Thursday night's action. They win and they're in a playoff spot potentially tomorrow morning. So I think one of those two will get in the East. So you're gonna have Toronto and either Ottawa or Montreal, and then in the West, I think Edmonton and Winnipeg are locks. And then you got I think you're gonna get one of Vancouver uh, or Calgary. So I think we're on the same page. I think 5 out of 7 are going to make it. That would be something though if somehow all 7 Canadian teams made the playoffs this year. Hey, Maddie.
yeah, that'd be awesome.
And then the next question, right along the same lines. I mean, we think 5 Canadian teams are going to make the playoffs this year. Who is the best Canadian team as of today? Is it Winnipeg? They have the most points. Is it Toronto? They're also a division leader. Is it Edmonton? They went all the way to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final last season. Who would come out on top, Maddie, if those teams, Winnipeg and Edmonton had a 7 game series, Toronto and Edmonton, Winnipeg and Toronto, who would you be betting on to bring home the cup, or who is the best Canadian team as of today?
I still think Edmonton will get back to the Stanley Cup Finals because I think Winnipeg's gonna their jet fuel's not gonna last. I mean, it's hard to push the pace in an 82 game schedule. Injuries happen. You never know. It's like a box of chocolates. You never know where you're gonna get.
Right? Good old Forrest Gump reference. And you're right though, there hasn't been a lot of adversity for Winnipeg, and when it gets to playoff time, especially if they match up with Colorado somehow in that first round,
Or Dallas.
or Dallas, yeah, they're gonna want they want to win the Western Conference. They get that second wild card, but whoever gets the first wild card, that's not going to be an easy matchup with whoever falls out of the Central there, because you got obviously Winnipeg, Minnesota, Dallas, and Colorado. One of those 4 teams are going to be a wild card by the looks of the way it's going at this point in the season. So if you're not the top seed in the Western Conference, you're going to be facing one of those 4 teams, and that could be a tough series for Winnipeg. Toronto, same thing, right? I mean, uh, if Washington keeps going the way they're going, and Toronto's the second seed, well, Toronto's going to get probably the fourth seed out of their own division potentially, whether that's Florida, Tampa, or Boston, or depending. I mean, Boston could fall back to the pack too, and maybe we see some different teams. The East is very close. I think the entire East is within 7 or 8 points of a playoff spot. All 15 teams over there, so it could go either way there. But definitely, like I said, Edmonton came oh so close last year, rallying to force Game 7 in Florida before falling 2-1 there. Literally coming within one goal of winning the Stanley Cup. Is this the year, Maddie, that the cup drought finally ends for Canada? Because we weren't even 10 years old the last time a Canadian team won, back in 1993 when Patrick Waugh backstopped the Montreal Canadiens to their last Stanley Cup. But who is going to be the next Canadian team to win a cup? And is this the year the cup drought ends?
Yeah, Edmonton's gonna win the cup this year because McDavid's gonna be playing like a man possessed. He's not gonna let anything lead him straight from his goal.
I like it. I like it. Plan that parade, Maddie. That's something everybody in Edmonton, music to the ears of the fans, or the Oilers fans that are tuning in. And I think we got a lot of them between the two of us and the people that are following along. And again, we appreciate everyone's support on the podcast. Maddie said what, over 440 views for our first
60.
show about the
Yeah.
Oilers, or 460 views. So we really appreciate it. And here's hoping a couple Canadian teams will enjoy long playoff runs this spring. I'd love. I mean, the Leafs are what they are, but I'd love to see them get to that East final and have two Canadian teams in the third round in the conference finals. I think that would be great. Whether it's Edmonton and Winnipeg facing off in an all Canadian Western Conference final would be cool, or if the Leafs could get in there, or a surprise team. Maybe we see Ottawa make the playoffs and go on a run, or Calgary or Vancouver, pull off some upsets. It would be great to see a couple Canadian teams go deep. And we'll definitely catch up again, Maddie, between now and then to revisit some of our predictions, see what happened at the trade deadline, or possibly even update some of our trade deadline predictions. And then obviously preview the playoffs in April. But thanks again for jumping on the show today. It's always fun talking hockey with you, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me. You're welcome.
For sure. Looking forward to doing it again. But enjoy Hockey Day in Canada, everyone, and stay tuned for the next episode of the Fishbowl Hockey Podcast.